Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3, our final day of Future of Video 2020 from Parks Associates. Wow, time has flown by, but we have a full day ahead of us today. 3 full sessions covering the OTT, pay TV, and digital media space. And we're going to jump right into our first session, which is the rise of ad-based OTT services. And as we'll be discussing throughout this session, just the explosive growth of OTT, of course, but really the ad-based space has just exceeded that, and the profile has been lifted so much in this particular category. My name is Steve Nason, Research Director. I oversee the entertainment research practice here at Parks Associates, and I'll be your host and moderator for this session on ad-based OTT services. To give you a rundown on what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of hours, I'll first be providing the first portion, an analyst insight on the latest industry trends and consumer trends in the ad-based space. Then we're so thrilled to have a visionary insight, a fireside chat from one of the leaders in the space, Tubi. We'll then migrate over to a panel of industry experts who are throughout the ad-based space, and we'll talk about how ad-based OTT has gone mainstream. It certainly has. And then we encourage you to stick around at the end of our session for a Zoom networking discussion where we'll be joined by our panelists and speakers, and we'll be discussing what's next for ad-supported OTT. And before we move any forward, I just wanted to say again, thank you to all our sponsors, our supporters, our speakers and panelists, and of course you, the attendees, for supporting our virtual event this year. It's much, much appreciated. And again, as I said before, would not be possible without all your support. So thank you. So as we transition into our analyst insight, as we have shared throughout Future of Video, and we'll continue to do so with our COVID-specific session to close out the conference, the COVID-19 crisis has had a profound impact on the video services and especially OTT space. The ad-supported OTT service space has been no exception. In my mind, there are 2 market factors primarily generated by the pandemic that have contributed to the meteoric rise of ad-based OTT services in both the number of services in the market and the consumer uptake, usage, and consumption of those services. One factor is a byproduct of the unprecedented financial impact that COVID-19 has had on the U.S. market. The combination of layoffs, furloughs, pay and hour reductions, among other effects of a depressed job market, have had a direct effect on the mindset of U.S. consumers. Households, both those directly affected by job-related losses and those not, are putting heavier scrutiny on their household expenses. At least in the short term, subscription-based OTT services, who are still seeing increased uptake as we've discussed, have been partially immune to this phenomena, but could start to see erosion depending on the duration of the devastating economic impacts. The ad-supported OTT space, on the other hand, has been a benefactor of the current economic climate. Households across the U.S. are looking to fill their still mostly homebound existence with entertainment activities, and those activities that are low cost or even free. Secondly, many in the industry describe the experience of watching free ad-supported OTT content as lean back, where the consumer does not have to be directly engaged or immersed in the viewing experience, but instead can take a more passive role in not only choosing what to watch in many cases, but also how to watch it. Ad-supported OTT services deliver on this role perfectly. It's such a stressful and emotionally filled time as we continue to be in throughout 2020. Ad-supported OTT plays a pivotal role in delivering a relaxed, comforting, tension-free viewing experience, the perfect antidote for our troubling times. The ad-supported OTT service space has also been marked over the past year or so by high-profile acquisitions of major services by leading traditional media companies. In addition to Sony's continued involvement with Crackle, which has had some developments recently, there have been 3 major acquisitions that not only raise the overall profile of the whole ad-based OTT category, but have transformed each of the participating services as well. First, last year, Pluto TV was acquired by Viacom CBS, And as Rob Gellick from Viacom CBS talked on Monday about during our event, Pluto TV represents the free pillar in the three-pronged streaming strategy for the organization. We have started to see the synergies among the free, broad pay, and premium pillars with the announcement recently that a Showtime linear channel has launched with over 250 hours of original Showtime content on the free ad-supported service, Pluto TV. Clearly, Viacom CBS is looking to evolve Pluto, and not just as a ad-supported OTT service, but also act as a gateway to other paid media properties in its streaming service portfolio. Will be interesting to track as the company's marquee SVOD Paramount Plus launches in Q1 2021, the role that Pluto TV will play in that service's development. Next, in February of this year, Xumo was acquired by Comcast. Recently, Xumo announced huge monthly active user growth reported, which is more than double the base than it had at the beginning of the year. Clearly, the COVID-19 crisis has accelerated its use across the whole category, but of course, Xumo is no exception. Recently, the service has been pivoting its content focus with the debut release of the film White Elephant as an exclusive in the first content window in November of this year. It was the result of a partnership with Bold Soul Studios to bring several exclusive titles to Xumo. Also, Xumo signed a partnership with Magnolia Pictures to bring a dozen exclusive films to the service through the end of 2020. And a final major high-profile acquisition in the space was when Fox Corporation acquired Tubi in April of this year. Before the purchase, Fox had been mostly on the sidelines in the OTT service market, while the market exploded around it. However, since the acquisition, Tubi has continued to grow its user base and content library. Specifically, the service has focused on curated collections, such as its deep roster of news content and its Tubi Kids and Tubi and Espanol collections. Tubi is trying to move beyond the first phase of ad-supported services that were simply reservoirs for licensed content and move to branding content, including assets under the Fox umbrella, to attempt to separate its content library from others. In our next session, as I mentioned, we'll be doing a deeper dive on Tubi as we welcome Andrea Clark Hall for a fireside chat. Beyond the acquisitions that we just discussed, the ad-supported OTT space has seen a major disruption recently when NBC Universal launched its hybrid OTT service, Peacock, first to Comcast customers in April of this year, and then nationally in July. Peacock is hoping its hybrid approach, marketing strategy, content format, and advertising experience will elevate and differentiate the service from its competitors, as well as become a major disruptor in the space. Specifically, in its first several months in the market, NBC Universal has led Peacock with three strategies. First, a focus on the free. The marketing approach has been differentiated because of the flexibility that a multi-business model approach allows in building a user, subscriber, and revenue base. NBC Universal has chosen to focus on the free during its initial steps of development. Through its heavy marketing and promotional campaigns and the promotional partnership with Comcast and Cox subscribers, Peacock has taken the slow and steady approach to building its paid subscriber base, as well as increase its ad base, impressions, as well as revenue. In addition, Peacock has also differed from many of its chief rivals in the space in its approach to content. The service is augmented by the House of Brands video-on-demand approach taken by many, but has also added in curated channels of its own content across its many properties, plus has added in licensed content from other providers in a live linear module. Peacock was also more aggressive at launch in including licensed content throughout the offering from outside providers such as rival media giant Viacom CBS. And then finally, Peacock is looking to deliver on a unique ad experience. Advertising from both a business model standpoint and a marketing position perspective is clearly a main focus for Peacock and will continue to be as it grows the service. Service has outlined and referenced in many public forums several ad formats and innovations that it hopes will differentiate the service and appeal to a younger demographic who is much more ad averse. Now I'd like to transition to some of our Parks Associates consumer data on the topic. While subscription is the clear number one most consumed business model in the OTT space based on past 30-day usage, ad-supported continues to be a strong number two option. When you combine the pure advertising model of a service such as Pluto TV and account for usage of what we call freemium services such as Crunchyroll that combine a free ad-supported tier of content and allow users to upgrade to a paid subscription tier to get exclusive content, advanced features, and other benefits. As we will discuss in our panel for this session, many services are migrating to or considering a hybrid approach in the ad-based space, as Crunchyroll and more recently Peacock have done. We anticipate the trend of ad-supported OTT usage will continue to gain on the subscription-based services as more offerings in the space begin to offer exclusive content and other benefits to draw customers in. Unlike in the SVOD space, where there is a clear leader and more defined hierarchy of services, there's a much different story in the ad-supported OTT service space. Several players, including newcomer Peacock, are vying to capture market share. From a consumer perspective, this lack of a clear market leader means there is tons of comparable choices to where to spend a free ad-supported video viewing experience. For the services, since the category as a whole is still in its nascent stage relatively, there is ample opportunity to carve out a leading market position with a differentiated content offering and seamless ad and user experience. Most video consumers are satisfied with the service they subscribe to and use, regardless of the business model. However, recent data suggests that subscription-based OTT services such as Netflix, Disney Plus, and Hulu do see higher satisfaction levels than ad-based services such as Tubi, Pluto TV, and Crackle. Consumers have a deeper and longer-lasting relationship with and stake in subscription services, primarily driven by the financial investment that they have to put into that type of service. If they decide to hold on to a subscription service and find enough value in it to justify paying a monthly fee, then they're more likely to be satisfied with it. Otherwise, they would cancel the service. Ad-supported services are attempting to build that same type of brand affinity and loyalty to become a core foundational part of a video consumer's service portfolio. The free aspect and the diversity of content rule the day in terms of drivers in the ad-supported OTT service use. Roughly one half of those using ad-based OTT services do so simply because the service is free. Ease of use and content are also more common drivers. Programming options are also important to consumers. An experience that combines the free with a varied and deep content catalog that can be accessed across devices is a right recipe to draw users into the ad-supported OTT space. Services that can excel by hitting on the free content and platforms will have the best opportunity at gaining more market traction and separate and differentiate itself from the competition. And finally, a willingness to watch advertising and a lack of cost are more common features of the ad-based OTT user experience. As we will discuss in our panel during this session, it is critical for services in the ad-based space to deliver as frictionless an ad experience as possible to draw in, engage, and keep users coming back to their service. The combination of a positive ad experience combined with a compelling content offering is the path forward for success. And with that, we're just going to take 1 minute to transition to our visionary insight with Tubi. We'll be right back. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. And we are ready to transition, and we're very excited to have our visionary insight from Tubi, and that would be Andrea Clark Hall, Vice President of Business Development at Tubi. Andrea, how are we doing this morning?
Good to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to have a discussion with one of the market leaders in this space. So I think it'll be really educational for our audience here. If you can just kind of give us an overview of your role at Tubi and maybe some about your history as well.
Sure. So I have been at Tubi for almost 5 years now. So really from the very early days.
Yeah, very beginning, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of evolution in the space, which is honestly really exciting. I started. I'm currently our head of global business development, so I do all of our distribution deals with the Rokus and the Amazons of the world. And then I also do. I've done through the years and currently still a number of content acquisition deals. Most recently, building out our live news product on Tubi. And also, I've done a lot of work in our international expansion and our strategic partnerships as we go global. Prior to Tubi, I spent a short year at Crackle. So I got to learn about, I've had multiple perspectives on the AVOD space. I'm an attorney by trade. I'm a career switcher, so
Really?
I was a prosecutor in New York for many years. So
Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe you should be asking me the questions.
there you go. Much less friendly. Much less friendly.
Well, yeah, I don't think I knew that when we had our pre-chat, so that's interesting. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting transition.
It is.
The world of video. But yeah, obviously, as you said, you're at obviously a major player in the space, but also at an incredible time in the history of not only OTT, but specifically the ad-based space. We're going to do a deep dive on that.
Sure.
Just a reminder before we kind of launch into our discussion, please submit your questions in the Swapcard app or platform under the questions tab, and we'll get to as many as possible with Andrea as we continue our 30-minute discussion. So I wanted to launch, you mentioned the word evolution, which kind of leads into my first question. Yeah, really the ad-based space, let's give it a 5 to 7 year window is really when it kind of started, and Tubi was kind of sort of at the beginning of that curve. So can you talk about, through your perspective, how the space overall has kind of evolved over that time, and then maybe Tubi's role in that evolution?
Absolutely. So Tubi, I've had I joined Tubi, as I said, almost 5 years ago now. And when I joined, my job was very hard because I had to convince all of these content providers to put their content on our service. And back then, the perception was that there's no money in AVOD. What is this thing, right? Is this
right?
I remember in the very early days of Tubi, one of the biggest points of customer feedback we'd get is this really legal? They the pirate side, like, how could this be legal? This is cool.
Right.
And so, but it was, so there were certain, market leaders in the media space who had the foresight to really lean in early and understood the market potential. Lionsgate being one of them. Right? Lionsgate was really a pioneer in leaning into AVOD, and certainly with Tubi, they were an early investor in our service and put their movies on.
Right.
And but that back then was a big deal. Now, obviously, we can all chuckle because everybody knows that there's real money to be made here. That AVOD is a really premium destination to put your top content. So I've enjoyed kind of my job getting easier through the years in a strange sort of way. To answer the latter part of your question about his role, so I'm sure many of you listening are familiar, but in case not, Tubi started as a company called AdRise. So Tubi actually really was the pioneer of this market. They created the first OTT ad server. This was when Roku was first being created, right? It was the super early days of Roku. Our CEO Farhad Masoodi had the foresight to say, this is going to be a thing. And back then he created applications for it was an engineering company, and they built and maintained ad-supported applications for other media companies, MGM being one of them. There were, I think, almost 200 apps at one point. But as the market evolved, Farhad realized and everyone realized that nobody wanted to go to 200 apps, right? Everybody wanted to go to one powerful app with a big content offering. And so Tubi was born, and we're really just leading the space in terms of innovation and and content library size ever since.
Yeah, that's a fantastic perspective, and giving everyone that history. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about it. I can only imagine 5 to 7 years ago, if you would have gone, like you said, the content providers, even distributors, saying, wait a minute, you're going to offer this free to consumers and they can watch as much as they want and they just have to watch some advertising. And that's how you're kind of, it must have been such a foreign concept to so many, even though it's really interesting, right? Because if you think about ad support, and I know this term fast, right? You've heard that recently.
Sure.
I kind of shake my head a little bit because if you think about it, broadcast TV, which has been around since 1929, is fast, right? Free.
Original.
Over the air. Ad supported, but I understand it's kind of a term that's kind of hot right now to describe Tubi and some other services. But even so, since this concept has been around for decades, it's still, at least on an OTT standpoint, seemed like a really foreign concept at the time, and to some, maybe still that way. So it's interesting, really, really interesting.
I often joke, what's old is new again, right? Like, yeah.
Right, totally.
Good.
Yeah, so actually that leads into my next point and question. I kind of put out there 2 factors that I think, obviously the OTT space, any entertainment activity has really seen this huge uptake in 2020. It's consumption. People are homebound. They have to not only entertain themselves, but potentially, older parents, kids that are not normally home because they're usually at school. And ad-supported OTT, I hate to use the word benefited, right, because we're in such a difficult time, but the byproduct has been that there's been a huge surge in ad-based OTT usage, right? And you've released numbers, some of your competitors have, just these astronomical leaps and international expansion and all that. I put forward that the economic realities of COVID-19 have kind of led to that, and the free aspect has really resonated, but also the lean back, right, kind of experience that is associated with ad support. It's a comforting feeling. It's obviously entertainment, but you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy. So that's my point of view. From your perspective, what have been the drivers of this is, as we call it as our session, the rise of ad-supported OTT in 2020?
Sure. Good question. Honestly, I think it actually kind of predates the pandemic, which was in March. I remember last CES, last January, the buzz was that 2020 was going to be the year of AVOD. That's what all of the research analysts like yourselves were putting out there. And I think it's because of a number of factors, right? At the SVOD market was maturing and to some degree saturating. There was less and less library content on SVOD services, right? Everyone's focused on originals, but people still want to watch their favorite titles, right? They still want to watch all these wonderful TV shows and programs. And there was this, very exciting all these exciting acquisitions happening, as you talked about. So all of a sudden, all of these independent AVOD services were now having much deeper pockets behind them, right? To get better content, better marketing. So I think all of that was happening before the pandemic came around. We were seeing tremendous growth in January and February. And when March hit, obviously I want to be sensitive to this because it is a weird position that we're in. It's such a tough time for our country and so many people are struggling. And here we are, with our numbers really exploding. I think the pandemic accelerated what was already happening. Right? It pushed it forward. But these were things that were in motion. It certainly did not come from nothing. And it's, I think the great thing for AVOD services, and certainly what we're seeing, is not only did we see a spike of viewership in March, we've seen a huge spike in returning viewers every month since. Right? And that retention is really what is key and so pivotal to kind of understanding how the after effects of the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you mentioned that. My colleague Jennifer Kent, she led a churn panel yesterday, and we had Crackle. Jason from Crackle is one of the participants in that. Yeah, appreciate that. And from our research perspective, we focus a lot on subscription churn, right? You were just kind of touching on, there is ad-based churn, right? And how you guys measure that. And obviously, because of the meteoric rise of a service like Tubi and others, it means that people are staying with the service month after month because your MAUs keep going up and up and up. So that means unless you're replacing all these people that are fleeing the service with new people, which is obviously not that sustainable, then obviously you're keeping your churn very low during this time, which I think is a big key to the rise of the whole category.
It's massive. I think, and people don't always, as you said, you talk about it a lot with SVOD.
Yeah.
But forget, what's different about the AVOD market, if people do not watch content, you do not make money, right? It's very simple. You need them to press play and stay long enough to see an ad in order to monetize that customer. And so retention is a KPI that we measure. We work very hard on. We measure it very closely.
Sure. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Especially with increased competition and everything else going on. I wanted to transition a little bit to kind of advertising, that whole space in general, and then specific to Tubi and kind of the ad-supported side of OTT. So a couple of different things, and it kind of lines up with one of the questions that we've gotten so far. So it's been widely reported since COVID-19 has had huge impacts on what let's call the traditional media space, advertising. Huge brands and advertisers have been cutting budgets on the traditional side. The upfronts on the ad side and the content have been blown up. And so on that side, you're hearing a lot of press about that, right? A lot of reports, but there hasn't been so much talked about on the OTT side, ad-supported OTT, about how the advertising climate is, what the environment's like. Someone was asking here about addressing anything related to CPMs, which I don't know if that's really in your realm or not, that you can talk on, but it's kind of the whole advertising environment on the OTT side, and then specifically the Tubi.
Sure. I think, certainly on the OTT ad side, like everyone in March, we saw a dip, right? March, April, there was a dip, but by, I want to say mid-April, end of April, everything started to rebound. And we are, I think the OTT industry as a whole is having a record Q4 in terms of advertising revenues. So you're not hearing a lot about it because we are not struggling. There is just, the ad growth is, the dollar amounts are growing in line with viewership, which is wonderful to say. And I think, I can't comment as to the specific amounts of CPMs. It's not my wheelhouse, but I can say that you will find that with increased sellout rates, there's scarcity in any market, right? It creates scarcity, and so I'm
value,
see how all of this evolves, because certainly Q4 for all AVOD services and anyone that I've talked to is going to be a time of very, very high demand.
Yeah, I mean, I bet. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I don't even know if you know the answer to this. Is it a function of not only the popularity and obviously everything that's going on the content side, but also the fact that maybe some of those dollars, traditional dollars that are allocated for traditional channels, are maybe shifting over to OTT?
Listen, that's what that has been the reality in the ad market for a long time.
Right.
Definitely, I think it's more that the ad dollars follow the eyeballs, and they want to reach people. Tubi, we have a young demographic, certainly a younger demographic than is on linear television, and advertisers want to reach those 18 to 34-year-olds, 18 to 49-year-olds. And so they know that they can reach those viewers on Tubi where they can't be reached on traditional linear television anymore. So we are, certainly very much benefiting from having the attention of that younger demo.
Interesting. And actually, I see a question that came in that's really interesting, kind of in that realm and in that vein. Someone is asking, do you have any evidence that consumers, the way they embrace brands and kind of attach themselves and have an affinity for brands, is that different on an OTT service such as Tubi as it is on the traditional side? That's an interesting. I don't know how much you could speak to that, but it's.
That's an interesting question. I don't. I mean, I'm probably not the exact right person to
Sure.
talk on this. I can say, that the unique thing about OTT advertising is that it is targeted, right? So you are more likely to see an ad that does resonate with you, that a brand that you do have affinity for. So in that regard, I think that advertising on an OTT service does help drive that affinity, because it is more relevant to the viewer. Whereas obviously when broadcast advertising has a different objective, right? It's just massive reach. But that's probably, I don't have any kind of documented.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I appreciate your perspective. It's just something interesting, and we're going to explore more in our panel next as well. It's kind of the whole advertising environment going on in OTT. As you said, it's not as well reported because maybe it's not as good a news story. But one more thing on advertising, but more at how it kind of marries up with content.
Sure.
Maybe you could speak more to. So if you saw my intro, I kind of talked about really the ad experience on an ad-based OTT service drives. That's the main component of the user experience. If they have a relatively frictionless, tension-free, even for those that are ad averse, right? Which again, you're targeting a younger demographic, which traditionally they're more ad averse, right, than like an older traditional audience. So how do you kind of marry the content with the ad experience to keep your viewers, well, first acquiring them, to bring them in initially, and then keep them engaged?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, amen. I agree. I would say that, certainly for what we have learned at Tubi is the ad experience has to be a respectful one, right? And what is, and there's different tolerance among different buckets of users, right? It is certainly an ad experience, an optimal one should be dynamic and personalized, and not kind of this blanket ad experience with 6-minute ad breaks or 10-minute ad breaks that need to be filled across all viewers. And so, oh boy, sorry, buddy, hold on. Sorry.
It's working from home. We know it.
Hello, my love. Hi.
Have a special guest.
Say hi.
We have a special guest.
We do. Come here.
Let's mic him up.
Say hi. Okay.
Hey.
It's Thomas, who just came back from nursery school, so excuse me.
That's the beauty of working at home, right?
Yes. All these, honestly, it's pretty awesome. It's kind of nice to see like our colleagues and their whole selves, right?
I know.
But anyhow, back to ad-supported. Yeah, the ad experience, it has to be dynamic. It has to be personalized, and the ad load has to be respectful. The other thing that we received a lot of, I think the industry as a whole received a lot of user feedback on, certainly in early days, was frequency. Right? And it was really a factor of direct sales plus programmatic sales and all these pipes coming in and trying to manage all of that, right? It was quite unwieldy. So it was very hard for a service to make sure they weren't showing a user the same Ford ad 4 times in a row and they'd go cuckoo. One of the things that we announced at Tubi at our upfronts was our own proprietary advanced frequency management tool. We can detect at the creative level what ad is coming in from all of these different players and make sure and solve that consumer pain point.
Right. So, interesting.
Anyhow.
Oh, so that's great stuff. Appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to shift gears away from kind of the topic of advertising and talk one of the other things and trends that we've seen in the industry. You kind of touched on a little bit. There's all these high-profile acquisitions, right? Where traditional media companies, pay TV provider, more traditional players have been buying up ad-based OTT services. So before we dive into the acquisition near and dear to your heart with Fox Corp, can you talk at all? What do you think is kind of driving this interest of traditional, what I'll say more traditional media companies in acquiring ad-based OTT services? What's driving that trend that we've seen over the last couple of years?
I mean, I think you said it best earlier, which is right the decline of linear and the drive, dollars moving away from linear, and so I think obviously they are streaming is the future. Everybody knows streaming is the future, and these media companies they're very smart people. They're very savvy to that, and so they AVOD is a huge piece of their future strategy, and a way for them to reach consumers directly, frankly, without the MVPDs of the world.
Right. Yeah, and I find as now we'll kind of shift gears a little bit and talk more micro about, obviously, as I mentioned, in April, Fox Corporation acquired Tubi, right? Brought them into the family. It was really interesting to me because unlike some of the other acquisitions, Fox, yes, they have been on the service side, right? Fox News has an OTT service, and there's other OTT properties. I wouldn't say they have been a major player in the OTT service space yet. Mostly still obviously on the broadcasting side, the traditional linear side. So maybe if you can first talk about, it sounds like an interview question, but what do you think that Fox Corp saw in Tubi, to watch as an attractive, specifically in Tubi, because obviously they had choices of many different services, right? And then what have been the benefits that you've seen from the Tubi side as far as being part of Fox Corp now?
Great question. So I can say that the Fox executives, we joined Fox at a very interesting time in their own company evolution, and so it's where they're really, at the time they bought us, they were only a 1-year-old company, new Fox, which is a wonderful benefit to Tubi because there's a very similar DNA about being lean and nimble, and trying to, there's a very similar cultural fit and DNA there. With regards to what they saw in Tubi, I think quite a lot. They really looked under the hood and they saw a company with a really great business model, great technology. I think, Tubi, we are an engineering company, a tech company at heart, right? We have our own, not only are just an app, but our own machine learning content recommendation engine, our own proprietary ad server. Right? No one else has their own ad stack, or own ad tech. This team of amazing engineers, and I think they saw this great technology. They saw a great team. Certainly in Farhad, our CEO, being a really just a wonderful visionary leader in the space, and it made a lot of sense for them.
Yeah.
I think they started to look under the hood, and they were quite pleased with what we have built, and really proud of that. I can say, in terms of what has been the best thing about this marriage, I think it's obviously probably no surprise to all of you. First of all, I will say Fox has kept Tubi independent. They, and that was part of this from the beginning. Tubi is an independently run unit under the Fox umbrella, which means that we get to keep our great culture. We get to keep all the things that are working and that we've done so well, because Fox knows, like, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right?
Right.
But they have brought in tremendous support for us. So content, we've got all of, so many of the Fox hit broadcast shows on Tubi now. The Singer came on Tubi, quickly became our #1 TV show. 24 Hours to Hell and Back, Lego Masters. We have all 17 of the Fox owned and operated local stations streaming on Tubi now. And you'll see, I think a theme is you'll continue to see more and more great content come from Fox to Tubi. But more than that, marketing. They are powerful, right?
Sure.
And so Tubi you've seen Tubi all over the NFL this season. I thought it was pretty floored when Tubi was presented during the World Series, right? Unbelievable. And certainly all of the Tubi ads that are running all over the various Fox networks. Fox knows how to build a household name.
Right.
And so they brought the power of this great content and these unbelievable marketing tools to Tubi. So it's exciting to see kind of where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I find it fascinating. First of all, we have about 4 minutes or so left, and our conversation's gone by way too quick. So please submit your questions for Andrea, and we'll get to as many as possible in our short time remaining together. But it's interesting you mentioned the word independence, because I always find it fascinating. I think people always assume when a company gets acquired or they're under this umbrella or they start a new service under this huge corporation that everyone is kind of all on the same team or all, and everyone's in this person's business and that, and it's not always. Obviously you have the synergies where you can kind of work upstream for the marketing prowess and the brand affinity with the Fox name and brand and the history of all that, but also you can still continue business like you did before. So it's really interesting. So I want to kind of spin it forward, so I like to do to kind of close out conversations. If you kind of look through your crystal ball, look over, I used to do 3 to 5 years in OTT, but that's like, I said in another session, that's like dog years. 3 to 5 years in OTT, that's like 20 years from now. So let's say 1 to 2 years. Where do you kind of see the ad-supported OTT space, both domestically and internationally, kind of going? And then what is Tubi's development going to look like? Anything you could share kind of moving forward?
Sure. I mean, I think the AVODs, we're really still in the early days,
Yeah.
right? It's a very nation state. So I think we continue to see it explode. I think you do see the leader. I think you see probably two AVOD leaders dominate, much like you've seen in SVOD, right? You know, there's, and so I think there will be clear winners in the space, which make the next year quite interesting. Um,
Yeah.
I am confident. I know Tubi will continue to be one of those be a winner of the AVOD space, and I think we start to see the benefits of these big media companies increasing the quality of the content. I think there'll be innovation in the different types of content on AVOD services. There's more and more great content akin to what you'd find on SVOD services being unlocked on AVOD as the ad dollars
Mm-hmm.
to roll in, and it just supercharges the economics.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, it's great for consumers, right? Consumers win because they get more
Sure.
content freed, and more choice.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, it looks like, unfortunately, we're right up against our time, Andrea, but I really do appreciate your time. So everyone, thank you, Andrea Clark Hall with our fireside chat, and hopefully you can stick around for our panel or our networking discussion later, and also enjoy the rest of the event. But thanks again for your time and perspective.
Thank you for all the awesome questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And we will be right back to kind of move our conversation forward with our panel of industry experts talking about how ad-based OTT has gone mainstream. I'll be back in a couple minutes. Thanks.
Parks Associates, ahead of the third annual Future of Video conference, released its updated list of the top 10 U.S. subscription OTT video services based on an estimated number of subscribers through September 2020 from Parks Associates OTT Video Market Tracker. Parks Associates notes that recent entrants such as HBO Max, Apple TV Plus, and Disney Plus have rearranged the top 10 list. Sling TV dropped out of the list, and with MLB.TV falling off, ESPN Plus is the only sports-based service in the list. Despite all these changes, the top three remain fixed with Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu. NBC Universal's Peacock is starting to make inroads in terms of paid subscriptions, but currently the base for that service is mainly comprised of users of the free ad-supported tier. Here are the top 10 U.S. subscription OTT video services, led by Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and then Hulu, with Disney Plus, ESPN, and HBO Max not far behind. The top 10 list also includes Apple TV Plus, CBS All Access, Showtime, and Starz. Steve Nason, research director at Parks Associates and author of Parks Associates industry report, The Next Big Three in OTT, says that for many years, the big three in OTT, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu, have ruled the top of the subscription-based OTT service space. However, with new entrants and expanded offerings, that trend may be about to change. The big three and their main challengers have gone to market with varying content and distribution strategies with the same goal in mind: reach elusive customers with a compelling content offering and user experience to be a foundational, essential service in an OTT subscriber service stack. Park Associates OTT Video Market Tracker tracks the content offerings, business strategies, and subscription numbers for OTT services in North America. The research firm reports that 78% of U.S. broadband households subscribe to at least one OTT service. That's up from 71% from the previous year. The new report, The Next Big Three in OTT, evaluates the emergence of the new SVOD services recently launched and their potential impact on the market penetration and revenue of the current dominant services. The Walt Disney Company announced 10 million subscribers upon initial launch, which put Disney Plus as fourth on the list, which it has remained for almost a year. That shows how difficult it will be for any service into the big three for OTT services. Partnerships are essential. For example, HBO Max will get a boost from its deal with Amazon to roll out its service on Amazon Fire devices. Parks Associates will explore new strategies in OTT, pay TV, and video services at the third annual Future of Video, OTT, pay TV, and digital media, a virtual conference on December 14th through 16th that features visionary speakers from Amazon, Bloomberg Media, ESPN, Reverie, Tubi, Verizon Media, and Wicket Labs. More information and registration can be found at www.futureofvideo.us.
Welcome back, everybody, and we're ready for our next session, which is a panel discussion on how ad-based OTT went mainstream. As we've talked about, while overall adoption of the ad-based OTT category continues to rise, no individual services have kind of taken the market lead. So we have taken the market lead, so that leaves a tremendous opportunity for a service to assume a leading position with a unique service offering. And this session will address the rapid evolution of the advertising OTT space as it becomes a more central part of the offering for many key services. We'll also track the growth in consumer consumption. We'll touch on that, and especially through the lens of COVID-19 and how these trends will shape long-term usage. Lucky for me, I don't have to go it alone. I have a panel of industry experts from the ad-supported OTT space. And first, we are going to hear from Henry Embleton, Head of Ad Products and Revenue from Crunchyroll. Henry, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Steve. Good morning. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. Henry, just kind of give us a brief overview of your role at Crunchyroll.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the head of ad products and revenue at Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll, the easiest way to describe Crunchyroll, it is sort of like the largest anime streaming service. It is the home of anime. We have over 3 million subscribers, over 70 million registered users, and we have an AVOD and an SVOD offering. So I'm responsible for all things AVOD. And essentially, we, as I say, the destination for anime. For those who are unfamiliar with anime, it is a long form storytelling medium that has obviously lots of evolved storylines across sort of romance, action, adventure, all in sort of Japanese animation style. So that's very much sort of where we focus. We pick our vertical, which is animation or anime, should I say, and we own that.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, it's an interesting time for Crunchyroll, which you may get to touch on at some point during the session. Welcome, Henry. Thanks again. Next, we have Paul Finster, VP Innovation and Web Scale Sales from MediaKind. Good morning, Paul.
Hi, good morning, Steve.
How we
thank
doing?
you for having us.
Absolutely, of course.
And a really interesting, discussion with Andrea.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Again, Paul Finster, heading up our innovation and web scale business here at MediaKind. We are a media technology provider and vendor with many, many years of innovation, many technical Emmys, won along the way. We are a collection of, a number of technology providers that have, come together over the last 10 or 15 years in service, a number of different industries, obviously in the media space. So, with encoding services, for broadcasters, for platforms, media and middleware technology platforms for telecom operators, content management services for cable and fiber, and broadcast services for some of the major sports names worldwide. So our product portfolio includes encoding, it includes streaming technology, includes consumer experience, and important for this session is all of the ad insertion and management of technology around inserting ads and blackouts and alternative content in the streaming space with our Prisma product. So again, very happy to be here and glad to join the group.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. And as Paul mentioned, he'll be our technical expert on the panel. So if you have any of those technical questions, and again, please, as a reminder, to submit those questions as we go along in the discussion. We'll get to as many with our panel as possible. Next, pleased to welcome Stefan Von Eggen, Senior Vice President, Content Programming and Partnerships with Zumo. Stefan, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I wish we were on the West Coast as we prepare for about 1.5 feet of snow.
You guys are gonna get a blizzard, I heard. Yeah.
But happy to be here. Even gave myself a quarantine haircut for the
Nice.
occasion, which went really terribly awry. I am the head of programming and content partnerships for Zumo. We are in 9 countries, serving over 24 million monthly active users with AVOD content, linear and on demand, with over 200 channel partners. So we're and this year, since the last time I was with you guys, this year we are owned by Comcast. So that is Zumo, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. As I touched on in my open, one of the many high-profile acquisitions that have gone on in this space recently. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome to our panel Jennifer Vox, Director of Programming Acquisition at the Roku channel with Roku. Jennifer, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I oversee content licensing for the Roku channel on the ad-supported VOD side, as well as the OTT linear side. In fact, Stefan's one of our great partners, and I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate it. All right, well, I'm going to jump right in. And as a reminder, yes, please submit all your questions in the question tab. We'll get to as many as possible. We also have a couple of poll questions that we want you to participate in. And we'll kind of queue up some of the results later on in our discussion, and get our panelists' views on those poll results as well. First, I want to throw this question out, and I'm going to start with Jennifer on this one. From your perspective, we'll get everyone else to kind of weigh in on this as well. How, in your view, has the ad-based OTT service space kind of evolved over the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years since really its beginnings? How's it kind of evolved, and maybe kind of Roku's and the Roku channel's role in that evolution?
Well, it's been a wonderful confluence of events. It's kind of like trying to jump aboard a moving train in terms of momentum. It's been, what Andrea said, like better content. So we've been able to have access to better content, which means viewers are more engaged, which means, higher ad revenue and ad dollars, which leads to a better ad experience and keeping folks in the ecosystem, but also product innovation and iteration. And so with all this in mind, we've seen not only on the Roku channel, but other AVODs, just hockey stick growth in terms of adoption, engagement, and retention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to touch on that, kind of the drivers in 2020 of that. Want to kind of throw the evolution question out. Let's go to Paul next, because he's going to have an interesting perspective on this, maybe more from a technical standpoint, Paul, on the ad OTT side. Where's it kind of evolved from where it started to where we are now?
Yeah, super interesting question. If you go back before pay TV, obviously there was only broadcast, and broadcast was supported through advertising and sponsorship. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a return to the past, but with completely new technology, obviously. The streaming technology, and ad insertion is now making possible something that was never possible before in a one-to-many distribution environment. Now it's really one-to-one, and with that capability, comes perhaps higher CPMs, ability to monetize individuals and accounts at a higher rate than broadcast. And now with these streaming services, coming online, we're getting essentially enough subscribers or enough viewers, I guess, to make the ad model work in that AVOD, model. But it comes down to technology, and as Andrea said before, this is complicated. It takes a lot of effort to get that technology platform up and running. And once you get the content deals done, then it's all about making sure the technology is running smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you touched on the FAST acronym, which as I mentioned to Andrea, I find a little bit humorous. Just the fact that free ad-supported television has been around for almost 100 years, right? But I guess this term has kind of come full circle, and now what is old is, as you kind of mentioned, is what new again. So it's really interesting that kind of that acronym has now attached itself to this space. Let's go to Henry. Henry, I wanted to get your thought on kind of the evolution of the ad-based OTT space, kind of from its beginnings, which roughly about 5 years ago or so, to where we are now.
I would actually counter that and say it's actually been around a lot longer than that. I say that in the context that Crunchyroll is nearly 14 years old. So in streaming service years, I think that's sort of pretty much sort of grandfathered in, as the saying.
Yeah.
So obviously we started web and then mobile, and then what we perceive as CCV, predominantly sort of Xbox and PlayStation. So it's been around for a long time, and it's good to see the market catching up. I jest a little bit. But in all seriousness, yeah, it really has sort of, it just keeps growing every month. Even before 2020, before we went into COVID, it would just continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, which is fantastic. And I think the majority, obviously, the thrust of that is demographics, right? That's really what it comes down to. I had the luxury of spending some time at my mother-in-law's recently over the summer, and she, was paying $200 a month for a cable box, right, from Spectrum. And it was a horrible experience, incredibly expensive, and I couldn't watch what I wanted when I wanted. So demographically, if we're all sitting around here, us millennials and Gen Xers, we can say, look, why do I need to spend this money when I can have what I want when I want it in a direct-to-consumer basis? So that's sort of been sort of the trend, and I think just, with really what it is on a macro level, it's gone from sort of aggregation to a siloed media experience from the individual brands. And then as we can see now, it's got too fragmented and too siloed. And now we're sort of going back to aggregation again, but just in a different version. Take the Roku channels, for example, is a prime example of that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great perspective on that. And Stefan, to kind of put a bow on this part of the conversation, and just kind of your thoughts on the evolution of the space.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started at Zumo, I'd have to explain the whole ecosphere to everybody, and and one of the things I used to tell content partners is, look, we're an alternative distribution model for digital video, because that was what's available. And now I've graduated just to saying that services like Zumo, like the Roku channel, are really just a cable replacement service, right? So the brands that are jumping in, the media companies that are jumping in, and the different distribution partners that are jumping in are all way different than 4, 5, 6 years ago, when it was a lot of digital video, that digital social video that populated these types of services. So I think it's really grown to being someplace where people are using it for daily habits of information and entertainment. And we especially saw that during the election.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about that. I want to transition. I want to start our next question off with our first poll. The audience, please, let's weigh in on our poll, which is, what are the drivers for the surge of popularity among consumers for ad-based OTT services? And the responses were COVID-19, content, free access, the lean back experience, which I touched on in my open, or something else. And it looks like kind of some of the results kind of goes along with some of our research. 40% of you say it's the free access. That is a huge driver, especially in these economically challenging times. Followed closely and relatedly by 27% COVID-19, 20% for content, and 7% for the lean back experience. So I'm going to start back up with Stefan here. What are your thoughts, let's go look at it both from an industry perspective and a consumer perspective. Obviously, the market has been flooded with the launch of ad-based OTT services from many larger companies, Amazon and others. You're now part of Comcast. We have Fox with Tubi and so forth. But also from a consumer standpoint, just the usage has gone through the roof. You just announced 24 million MAUs, right? Like 2.5 times what you had in January. So what is fueling all that from both the industry side and consumer side?
Yeah, I think from a consumer side, I would put the COVID-19 and the free part together. So more people working at home with screens on, way more people sort of experimenting and looking around for something different than necessarily just the cable package, and wanting to choose a little bit more what they are watching when they're watching it. So I do think that is part of the growth. I think what we see as well is it is that lean back kind of experience, right? When you think about a Netflix or even a Disney Plus or something like that, you're making a choice, right? You've been marketed something, or you're going there to specifically sit and watch a program or a show. And services like Zumo, where it's as easy as the old-fashioned up and down to change channels, it sort of gives you that ability to just lean back, flip through, and kind of have a friend on in the background, right? Have right. Some noise on in the background while you're doing things, and be more of a I don't want to say a passive viewer. That would be bad for advertisers, but more
I
of
used that word, so maybe that was my fault too. But yeah.
All right, but having the ability to just have something on that you're not committed to immediately, right?
Right.
Whereas in a lot of the SVOD services, you're committing to this hour or this 2 hours. I think that's a major part of why you see the growth in these free, coupled with a sort of traditional TV-like experience, coupled with just usage at home.
Yeah, it's all a perfect storm of what's happening in the market. Jennifer from Roku, your thoughts on kind of what's been fueling the rise of ad-based OTT?
It's free. Free is a very strong value proposition, and as Stefan said, especially today, and with that ability to kind of have a selection of choice, I think consumers are cutting the cord because their needs are being satisfied, whether it's AVOD or SVOD, and it's all in the streaming environment. Around 40% of cord-cutting households said free or extended free trials to a streaming subscription helped convince them to cut the cord.
Yeah, absolutely. Henry, any thoughts on that? What's been fueling the drivers behind this increased profile of the category as a whole, but also consumer usage?
I mean, consumer behaviors are changing as well, and the one thing that underlines that is the advancements of technology, and we're all getting broadband in our home and getting super fast Wi-Fi. So that's that's enabled it, and that's you wouldn't have been able to do this 10, 15 years ago with the dial-up ISDN lines or hardwiring it in. So I think that's obviously sort of the first thing, and then that just enables the change in the sort of the consumeral sort of behavioral changes. We've gone from downloading music to streaming music. That technology has enabled it, and that's right. Very much the case, and video is following on from that. So as I say, technology, demographics, behavioral change, and then obviously sort of everyone testing the economic models as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of shift gears here. I kind of touched on a couple of these topics with Andrea as well from Tubi, and I'm going to start with Paul on this because it's a unique technical perspective. But obviously we have heard a lot about it. One of the major impacts on the industry side for COVID-19 has been on advertising dollars being spent traditionally. Just in huge brands, those that typically have huge still traditional media budgets allocated for advertising through traditional channels, right, took a huge hit because their own businesses, right, are have been hurting, even those large companies, and obviously mid and smaller to an even worse degree. So we hear a lot about that in the news and the media about all the how traditional advertising is way down since COVID-19. We don't hear a ton about it in OTT. Andrea said that's because mostly because it's rocking on the advertising side in OTT, and that's not as good a news story for that. So, Paul, from your perspective, you mentioned kind of broadcast, which obviously has been hurting from an advertising perspective.
Sure. I mean, I can say for sure, the ad business on the broadcast side has been hurt, with COVID. We service many different, broadcast partners, many of whom, rely a lot on sports. And, when COVID hit and shutdowns happened, and sports leagues, went dormant, there was definitely a hit to their revenue, which, obviously translates into, purchasing and, decisions with vendors like MediaKind, being postponed or delayed.
Mm-hmm.
So there certainly was, and still is to some degree, a hit to advertising revenue on the broadcast side. But as you mentioned on the streaming side, everything seems to be, full steam ahead. The growth in streaming is amazing. Many of the sports leagues are actually, looking to go direct now, direct to consumer, and are exploring, global, distribution, which in some markets will lean heavily on advertising, and then in other markets with higher ARPU, there will be a paid component, obviously. But I think if anything, it's accelerated, technology decisions on streaming and advertising. So that's kind of the view from the vendor, media technology partner.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I want to get other people's opinion on that. I'm going to start with Stefan. Because one of the questions that came in is, and Paul touched on, it's kind of the one-on-one advertising that you can do more with OTT than you can traditionally, right, where it's more mass. So this question, which kind of rolls into what I was going to ask, how are things going on the ad side for your services? Someone asked, how important is it to be able to personalize advertising to reach your audience? And to be able to use different types of ad formats, like I touched on that Peacock is doing, to kind of reach your audiences. So if you can kind of address that and kind of the scope, Stefan, of how are things are going in Zumo from the advertising side.
Yeah. So, I think in the beginning of COVID, back in the spring, there was a little bit of a dip, and I think it was while everybody got their feet underneath them and budgets reallocated, and then also just the actual creative, right? If you're selling beer and you're selling beer with a commercial where everybody's in a bar, that's hard to do when everybody's at home. So the actual advertisers had to rethink some of their creative and get that in. So there was a small dip, but it's definitely come roaring back. I'm in line with Andrea on that, and with Paul. I do think there are several reasons. One, the budget sort of shifted, right? It's easy to sort of activate a spend on an OTT platform and a digital platform. The sports thing is major. I mean, I think you saw there was an article this week, I think, about some of the ratings for NFL being down and having to do make goods for advertisers. And where are you going to put those make goods if there's not more games or whatever? So a lot of those budgets do shift to OTT, which has been really great for services like ours. And then you get into the personalization. I think what's important there is making these services stand out as a good experience for users, right? That's ultimately what it is. In many cases, services like Zumo have less of an ad load than a traditional hour on broadcast, right? Make it a little bit stickier for users, and more reason to be there. Talking about different ad units and ways to do things, making it a better user experience for the consumer. And so I think all of those are considerations, and personalization goes a long way to that, where it's selected and allowed, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you must have read one of our attendees' minds, because they submitted a question about ad load and what is the ratio that is acceptable to consumers. I know Peacock announced when they launched their ad-supported service, 5 minutes, I think, was their ad load, as compared to a traditional like 15. So anyone wants to chime in on kind of the acceptable ad ratio or anything like that, it's kind of part of your bigger answer. But kind of putting a bow on this topic, Jennifer or Henry, if you want to chime in, kind of what you're seeing. I know you're more on the content side, but kind of what you're seeing the advertising environment at your services.
Yeah, the advertising revenue is as I say, I think so comparable with everyone as well. Q1 and Q2 have been pretty scary and pretty dire. Q3 and Q4 have been positive, which is fantastic. I think just again, so looking at the broader picture as well, what's interesting in these sort of these black swan events, these recessionary environments, normally advertising is the first to go in terms of budgets.
Right.
What's interesting, I was reading sort of a blog post and talking about what happened to the advertising industry in 2007, 2008. And really what happens is the market sort of maybe contracts just a little bit, but then rebounds very, very quickly. But if you look underneath in terms of actual sort of the sort of diversity or the ratio of where those advertising dollars are spent, what happened in 08 is obviously it basically marked the decline of print media and sort of the shift into digital display. And I think what we're seeing here in sort of these times is, again, as you say, the decline of of traditional linear and going to sort of that OTT base. I think and then of course there's always the dollars follow where the eyeballs are. And again, with that sort of technology and demographic and behavioral change, we're seeing sort of that shift from, as I say, traditional linear to sort of digital OTT.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, anything you want to add to that topic before we move on?
It was a great point that Henry made, that we're seeing a shift in consumer behavior and adoption, and where the eyeballs are, the ad dollars will go. And at Roku, we've always believed that the future of TV, and not only TV, but TV and ads, will be streamed. So we're hyper focused on that. But the pandemic accelerated consumer adoption of streaming faster than we could have predicted. So we haven't so much changed our priorities, rather we've just amplified and accelerated what we're already working towards. And we've launched the OneView platform, which is a demand side platform for advertisers to reach their audiences basically against the content they want and the audience they want.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely. And I want to kind of transition, you've all kind of touched on this, but in my intro, I talked about how important the ad experience for consumers is. That really directs their user experience. Everything else, even the content, plays sort of a secondary role. If that ad experience is not as frictionless and I'll use the word tension-free as possible, then there's a chance that people are going to be fleeing the service side. So I really want to dive into with each of you. We'll start with Paul again, because he provides kind of a unique perspective working with clients in the space, more technical. What are you seeing with your clients or just in the industry in general to try to improve that ad experience for ad-supported OTT services?
Sure. So I'd say, obviously, the technology side, can be complicated, where there's a mix of different, streaming standards, whether it's HLS or Dash or CMAF or, something else, a mix of, consumers who bring their own device, and every device is different and has different capabilities and different media players embedded in those devices. Obviously the content needs to be protected and encrypted along the way. And the ad pods, sometimes are well signaled, but in other times they're not well signaled, or they're very ad hoc in a sports environment where they're breaking in and out. So ads may not completely play, or ad pods may not completely play. And there's the requirement to do, beaconing to, understand what ads play when, and all the analytics and measurement that goes into that. So, from a technology stack perspective, it's actually pretty complicated and can be complicated, and relies on CDN networks, which sometimes have hiccups. So, there's a lot to it under the covers, and so there's a lot of considerations, from an operational perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I shared some of our consumer research on attitudes towards advertising, and obviously, like Andrea said, with Tubi, they're targeting millennials and Gen Zs, which are traditionally much more ad averse, and you really have to do that balance between obviously servicing your advertisers, deliver the impressions they want, obviously generating the revenue to keep the service sustainable and growing, but also have the consumer in mind, right, and balancing all that. So really love to hear on the service side. Let's start with Jennifer at the Roku channel. What are you doing internally to try to improve that ad experience for your users?
Well, we're constantly monitoring the ads experience in general on the Roku channel, and we are ideating ways to level up the streaming experience and the ads experience as well. We are half the ad load of traditional television, so we try to make it not as invasive and naturally integrated. We also have other flavors where we can offer a limited advertising share of voice around our sponsorships program, where a brand is able to own a block of content or other different products that we have out there in the marketplace. So we're constantly on the Roku channel thinking about that. And then again, on the platform side of the business, we have our OneView demand side platform, which is allowing advertisers to not only target the audience that matters most to them, but control frequency and messaging.
Great. Henry, your thoughts on at Crunchyroll, how you're trying to improve the ad experience for your users?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I saw a really interesting tweet the other day, which was imagine if there were no ads on the internet. Now imagine every time you wanted to read an article or watch a piece of information, you'd have to pull out your credit card and pay for it. So there's that exchange. So there is that there's always that sort of, you're looking for that apex of sort of maximizing your experience for optimal consumption, but at the same time optimizing your revenue at the same time, because you have to pay for the content. So I think the wonderful thing about this sort of, OTT environment as it continues to accelerate is, again, the technology will enable us to sort of be more dynamic and innovate with just, serving spots and dots on a sort of gross point rating basis. So, I think there's some interesting ad tech companies and ad tech partners that we work with that offer sort of interactive ads, which are, a combination of reduction of ad load for more engagement, so better CPM. So effectively, the publisher wins, the advertiser wins, and also as well, the user wins as well, which is, those kind of things. So we're going to continue to see that. What is interesting that I'm still yet to see, and I'm surprised there hasn't been a company that has sort of launched and sort of pushed this, is sort of working on what's called like a dynamic ad load. So you recognize that one user in a cohort is susceptible to sort of, consuming more ads and another one is not. So you can kind of discriminate your ad load against your users. So I think there's opportunities there. And then again, with the technology, you're going to start to, I think, see the evolution of the CPM model start going into like cost per interactions or cost per this, cost per that. There will be some change in evolution again, because the technology and the behavior sort of demographics will allow that.
Absolutely. And to kind of put a bow on this topic, Stefan, what are your kind of thoughts on what Zumo is doing to improve the ad experience?
Yeah, so actually what Henry was just talking about is something that we do across our platform in terms of dynamic ads. It's not on a personal level, but it is on a channel level. So we're always trying to maximize that engagement as well as the revenue. So if a certain channel can handle more ads, we can serve more ads without dropping engagement, then we'll serve more ads. If channels can handle less ads, we'll dial it back a little bit. So we do have a bit of that up our sleeve. So that's kind of what we're doing on a technical standpoint. What I will say is I do think, and when we're in person at these things and there's an audience, I like to sort of survey and say, well, okay, who likes free content? Who will put up with some ads for some free content? And I think as an industry, we're constantly talking about ad load and user experience and consumer experience. But as a consumer, when there is no subscription, when there is no credit card, when there's no monthly fee, you kind of understand the value exchange, and people are generally okay with it as long as you're not going heavy-handed or overboard from a ad perspective. And I think we have not sort of seen any kind of blowback around advertising, or too much advertising or too little advertising, or it just seems to be the contractual exchange between the consumer and these platforms.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's part of the deal. There has to be that exchange there. Absolutely. Before we kind of move on to our next topic, got a couple interesting questions that have come in. This one, I'll let Jennifer and Stefan fight over who wants to answer first. The question is, do you see major rights holders such as FilmRise stepping back from distribution via a Roku channel or a Zumo so they can keep as much as the ad revenue in-house, or will they stay with partnerships with services such as you, where they can get more viewers and hopefully net out more ad revenue? And before I kind of let you answer that, obviously we had our aggregation panel yesterday mostly talked about on the subscription side, and obviously there's this push and pull between the aggregators and the services where they want to keep as much revenue in-house, much user data in-house, all that. So it's similar type, I think, in the vein, similar type of question here, but more on the ad side. So Jennifer, Stefan, who won the arm wrestling? Who wants to take this one?
I mean, I'm happy to briefly jump in if you like. I mean, we like to be a good partner for everybody, and we're kind of agnostic as to how people, how they want to operate on the Roku platform. But the Roku channel itself reached over 52 million households last quarter. So we are a very strong value proposition to work with aggregators.
Okay. Stefan, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's a scale game. You're talking about ad-supported media, so keeping things back to limit your scale, to limit the ads you can serve, is limiting your revenue. So I have not seen sort of a pullback from any content partners, more an expansion of what can we do, what else can we do, where else can we reach people, where else can we serve content.
Okay, absolutely, fair enough. Let's see. Yeah, we kind of touched on this. Maybe I'll let Henry kind of handle this one. One of our attendees is asking, how important is it to be able to personalize advertising to the audience? Do you fill up an ad break with several different ads going to different segments, or is it more targeted during particular breaks? Anything you can add to that?
I mean, obviously, targeting is key to an optimal ad experience. There are still some gremlins and bugs in the ad tech system where we still have frequency cap issues where you do get 4 ads, the same ads back to back together, which is sort of like just it needs to be sort of remedied. But the idea is obviously data, targeting, location, and all of those kind of things. If you can personalize that experience, I think that's obviously sort of provides an optimal ad experience. Again, everyone sort of has this sort of conception that advertising is a bad thing, but advertising can be a very good thing. It can inform, it can inspire, it can educate, it can it can save you money, it can make your life better. It's just too much of a good thing can obviously be a bad thing at the same time as well. So I think there is this general people go into this like, oh, ads are bad, and I would sort of push back against that notion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I think none of us really be here if it wasn't for advertising. There wouldn't really be an industry. So yes, absolutely. We got to kind of balance, I think, is where we're trying to get to. I wanted to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to tee up Henry because this is mostly in his wheelhouse. I touched on it in my opening as well, but it's just a trend that we've seen in the industry about hybrid business models, right? So Crunchyroll is a perfect example of that. We refer to it as a premium service, right? You have a free ad-supported tier where you have content, and then you give the option to users to migrate to one of your paid tiers, which with additional benefits and features, but obviously also, most importantly, exclusive content that is ad-free. I really would like to hear your perspective, and then anyone else who wants to jump in. Maybe I'll go to Paul next. Your perspective on kind of that whole process, how it's decided to kind of structure a Crunchyroll. I mentioned a Peacock as well that has done that in this space more recently. And HBO Max has announced they're going to add an ad-supported tier, though it's going to be paid, right? All these different configurations that you have to mix advertising and subscription revenue. If you can kind of walk through that whole process, specifically for Crunchyroll, just any thoughts in general, and what are the advantages and maybe even challenges with having a hybrid business model?
Yeah, no, well, that's it's a lot to distill down, and that's
yeah, sorry, a lot of questions.
Break down the whole methods model in a paragraph or two.
Yeah.
Look, I think high level, obviously, everyone has their own sort of different sort of strategic sort of footing or where they come from, right? So if you look at use Peacock as an example, or HBO Max, or some of these big, the way we would think about it is you have big and broad services, and big and broad, they have multiple different content genres, whether it's action, romance, adventure, anime, sport, all those kind of things. So the sort of the offering, it has to be a little bit different, right? Whereas we consider ourselves on the sort of anime sort of vertical, right? Just more focused on the verticalization. So the big and broad streaming services, you have, primarily two main revenue streams, subscriptions and ads. And then as you say, some variation of hybrid where it's, ad light or subscription light or just ads only. And then obviously you need to look at the demographics of who your audience is based on your content offering. So again, in our world, in anime, our audience is going to be fundamentally very different from, the Roku audience, for example, because we are predominantly sort of like 13 to 35-year-old, 70% male. So those demographics either probably aren't used to paying for content, don't have the capabilities to pay for content, or just unsure about this whole model. So they want it for free, and that's how you unwrap it. So the way we think about it is it's a big funnel. You put more people into the funnel at the top for basically sort of registered for free, and obviously we don't sort of dynamically sort of window our content. It's either with ads or without ads. Okay. So everyone's up at the top of the funnel, and then the idea is obviously you want to drive the users down that funnel through a combination of incentives, obviously sort of over a time period they fall in love or sort of derive more value from the brand than the actual subscription price there is, and then obviously there's other community features and benefits in our world. Look at HBO Max, for example, as you say, they're going very much down the Hulu route, which is obviously subscription light. You pay less, but you get it with ads. And again, that's sort of, what they probably tested and found that works for their demographic and their audience that they're going to be targeting. So again, it all, it's sort of, as I say, the way we look at it is a big funnel. Obviously, you want to optimize your content consumption as best you possibly can using ARPU as a metric, average revenue per user, and that's sort of the way you look at it. So there will be different tiers and different sort of ways to slice and dice that. So that's how we think about it. For every hour of consumption, squeeze as many dollars as you can out of it.
Yeah, fantastic perspective there, Paul. I want to kind of throw the question your way, but obviously from a different perspective, you probably work with clients that.
Yeah, I'd say I agree completely with Henry. It's when we work with customers, it's a mix of that funnel, bringing, customers in, essentially give them a try before they buy, and allow them to, potentially snack on some content, whether it's for, a week, a day, a month, so once you transition from, that free user to a subscriber user, there's a different way of managing that customer, because then, once they're on the subscriber side, it's all about churn, but there's a more predicted, revenue stream from that customer. So the strategies for keeping that customer, change, pretty quickly once they move from AVOD to SVOD. So there's a lot of technical challenges in the platform for, again, moving from that free user, to an entitled, paying, customer, and you have to make sure that the boundaries are set up properly and enforced properly.
Yeah, I'm curious, just following up on, obviously you speak more from the technical side. Are there technical challenges for clients that are considering maybe bolting on another business model or delivery method or restructure of how they deliver content? Do you see that? So
sorry, was that to me?
Yeah, to you, Paul.
Oh. Yeah, so we definitely see challenges along the way, and it really depends on the platform and how the platform's been built to support those hybrid models. Many platforms may start out just as AVOD, and there's no consideration into adding entitlements layers for chunks of content or individual pieces of content. So technology definitely plays a role there, and it can be a bit of a struggle to move from a homegrown platform to one that supports subscription VOD. So it just depends on each of our customers.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. And Jennifer, of course, the Roku channel, you guys do it a little differently, right? Because you have your ad-supported content side, right, where someone can come in and enjoy a free experience and content. But you also, last year, in January of last year, you introduced premium subscriptions, right? So you've gotten into kind of the aggregator game, right, where users can come and in one unified platform can just subscribe to a bunch of different subscription services, right, OTT services. So can you talk a little bit about that maybe? Is it you just see it as a value add benefit for Roku users, or what is kind of the approach behind that?
Yeah, our focus was creating a frictionless experience for the Roku channel viewers. And so what we're seeing is, we have over 46 million monthly active accounts and thousands of apps. And so what we wanted to focus on was ease of use and discovery. And so what we saw is there are folks who will always want to be app-centric and go into their apps first, and then there are viewers who will discover great content in the Roku channel, and we've made it very frictionless to click to subscribe. So then you start getting a blend of your subscriptions that you have within the Roku channel as well as free. And so what we find is we're keeping a great content ecosystem live and viewers engaged. And so for them, it's seamless going from say a great show on Showtime all the way through to a great free television show like Army Wives.
Interesting. And Steph, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, obviously Xumo is not a hybrid service at this point, but under the Comcast umbrella, which does have a variety of different OTT offerings and platforms and so forth. Any thoughts on kind of the hybrid business approach and as it relates to the ad-based space?
Yeah, I think a lot of I'll talk about it in terms of how I see some of our content partners approaching it, which is there's a front porch philosophy to the AVOD side of it, right? So to the extent that Xumo is available on X1 Flex, Comcast products, a content partner may see Xumo as an additional distribution point for AVOD content that will lead to an upsell to subscription services. So I think a lot of content partners approach it from that front porch mentality. For Xumo specifically as our own platform, it always comes up in a strategic meeting, but by and large, we are AVOD all day, all the time.
Right. You have T-shirts printed with that on it, AVOD all the day. Nice. I like it. Well, that kind of leads into our poll question. We have about 10 minutes left in the session, so please keep continuing to submit your questions. We love all the questions. We'll get to as many as possible. But we asked our audience, and I got to admit, I'm looking at the results. I'm a little surprised by this. So I kind of laid out our consumer data that obviously subscription in the OTT space is still the dominant business model. And then when you combine pure advertising business model with freemium services like Crunchyroll, it's still number 2 behind subscription. So I kind of laid out for our audience here, how likely is it that advertising is the dominant business model in OTT in 5 years? And I'm kicking myself because again, 5 years from now is like 20 normal years in OTT, but still 71% of our attendees say either somewhat or extremely likely that advertising will be the dominant business model in OTT in 5 years. And I gotta admit, we are a subscription society, especially here in the US. We love subscriptions to anything, from ties to food to video services. So I'm a little surprised that folks are saying that. So let's get some of the thoughts of our panel here. Let's start with Henry. Are you surprised at that at all? 71% are saying that it's likely that advertising will be the dominant business model in OTT in 5 years.
I think we need to sort of extrapolate and define what dominant means. Are we talking about total users? Are we talking about total revenue generated? I think that's probably where we need to understand. There's no way that advertising will generate more revenue than subscription does. It's just, as I say, think about it. From our perspective, an ARPU perspective, right? We charge up to $10 a month, and our best month, an ad-supported ARPU user, we managed to drive it to sort of like 65 cents. So we're eons away. So from a revenue perspective, no way. But from a sort of, total user-based consumption or sort of, scale, I mean, again, it depends on sort of what you're measuring. So yes, I can understand there's always going to be more free users than paid users. That's the nature of the funnel and the dynamic. But as I say, it's that sort of, it's conversion. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, interesting. I would imagine we didn't define it. We kind of like to keep those a little more open-ended, but I'd imagine most people thought from a consumption standpoint, but maybe not. Yeah, totally. From a revenue standpoint, right, there's a huge gap there. Jennifer, any thoughts on our poll before we kind of launch into our last topic?
It's hard to speculate in 5 years, to be honest with you. I just think as long as there's great content, people will watch it, and we'll try to support how people want to watch it. And I think the challenge that when you have so many subscriptions, at some point there's a tipping point. The pocketbook is only so big, and as you're seeing with basic cable, people are cutting the cord and coming to a platform that has value, and so free is still a very strong value proposition.
Absolutely.
I might add, Steve, that it really depends, whether it's global or domestic, and ARPUs around the world are much lower, and ad-supported content is much more interesting for many people around the world. But domestically, subscriber business is going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer touched on the content. I find it fascinating. We touched on it a little bit, and Stefan, when you and I talked pre-chat, you just signed a couple of distribution agreements with some studios, right, to exclusively distribute some content. That's kind of a relatively new development in the ad-based space. Others are Crackle, has original programming. A lot of the services are in this space are, generating original content and maybe trying to obviously move the category forward, which kind of leads into our last topic as we have about 5 minutes or so. And again, please bring in your last minute questions here before we have to say goodbye to our panel. But I just wanted to throw it out. I want to get each of your opinions, kind of spinning it forward. I'm not going 5 years. Jennifer's point, who knows where we're going to be in 5 years, especially in OTT. Let's go with 2 years. Over the next couple of years, how do each of you kind of see the ad-supported OTT space, either domestically, internationally, wherever you want to kind of frame it? Where do you see kind of evolving from here, and then your organization's role in that? So let's start with Stefan on that.
Yeah, well, I think I would separate domestic and international. So I do think that it will grow significantly internationally. Zumo has started that already, and will continue with that. And I think you'll see a lot of the other platforms with the ad-supported linear services expanding their roles overseas. I think, it's a different value proposition to audiences across the world. If you think about, Europe, and even thinking about Europe holistically as one is the wrong thing to do. But if you think about Europe, where in many countries the national broadcasters and content providers are already free, it's not the same value proposition as in the US, where you're saying, look, you pay $200 a month for cable and you can cut the cord and have free linear lean back service from the Roku channel or Zumo or something like that. So it is a little bit of a different value proposition, but what we do see is on the digital advertising side, on the programmatic side, things starting to accelerate. I think COVID accelerated the usage internationally. And then the discovery of the content and better content available territory by territory is accelerating international. So I'd say that will be a definite rise. On the domestic side, I look at it the way cable was, and then the way SVODs were, which is you start with a library of content, you acquire rights, and then you start dabbling in exclusive rights to that content, and then eventually it rolls into originals, right? So that seems to be the progression that cable took. That's the progression that SVODs like Netflix took. So if you look over the next 2 years, I think that's the progression that you'll see AVOD platforms starting to look at as the ad revenue supports it.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm on board with that. Let's go to Jennifer next. Let's get your thoughts on the evolution of ad-supported over the next couple of years.
Great. So in my mind, the evolution will require leaning in on data. And so one of the things about Roku as the platform is that we have strong first-party data and a direct relationship with the consumer. And so I think the key is how do we iterate on that to not only surface up the content that people want to watch, but then deliver the ads experience that will encourage people to stay. And so we're constantly looking at that and iterating on that. And then how do we innovate? How do we bring in key partners? So that's kind of how we're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had our data panel yesterday, and I've talked about it. The struggles between services and aggregators and platforms. It's all about the data. That is so critically important in all aspects of OTT. Okay, let's go to Paul to get your final thoughts on kind of the evolution of ad-supported OTT moving forward.
Yeah. So I totally agree with Stefan's. We're at the very start of new streaming virtual MVPD world, and that world can be global. So the brands that are being built for streaming today do have and can have global reach, which means I expect them to grow quite quickly internationally, and adopt local content and ethnic content that's appropriate for those regions. And I view the progression that Stefan described as the natural progression for each of these large platforms as they grow. Scale is going to be a huge challenge, and obviously with that scale comes technical challenges of delivering to millions of customers, and so the technology platform is going to be a key for the growth of those services both domestically and internationally. So I think that kind of is going to be key, underpinning all the success that these MVPDs or virtual MVPDs are going to have is that technology underpinning.
Fantastic. And Henry, you get the honor of the last word on our panel as far as spinning it forward a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we're going to have, I think you alluded to it before. There were some conversations around data, and that's obviously I think the challenge, the sort of tussle between users, regulators, and advertisers. Data's going to that's going to determine the sort of trajectory of this market. But what I would say though is, as I say, I see the rise of more automation, more sort of data targeting, and then obviously sort of programmatic will continue to dominate. And then, as I say, I think there's just you're going to see more new innovative ad products, that are just, as I say, going to evolve that CPM model. It's going to probably change, and as I say, we're going to start to see different models from it.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I will once again thank my panel of Henry, Paul, Stefan, and Jennifer for a fantastic chat. Hope you guys can stick around for our networking session, which is coming up next. Before we get to that, we'd love to thank again our sponsors who make this event possible, which would be Salesforce, and our gold sponsors and our silver sponsors, as well as our supporters of our event, including our platinum sponsors and our other supporters. And finally, I would just like to thank the attendees. This is my last live session, so I would just like to thank everyone for tuning in. We'll continue the conversation with a couple of more sessions today, but I just hope everyone has a healthy and happy and safe, most importantly, holiday season. And with that, we're going to, if you look in the event page, you'll see the Zoom link for our networking session, which is coming up right now at 11:45 Central. Where you can interact with others, and especially our panelists and speakers that were part of this session. And that'll be led by my colleague, Kristen Hannick. And then at 12:30 to 2:30 Central Time, My colleague Jennifer Kent will lead our next session, which will be OTT partnerships, key to success. So thank you all again, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Appreciate you joining us today. My name is Steve Nason. I am Research Director at Parks Associates. I cover our entertainment research practice, and I'm honored today to be joined by Jesus Luzardo from Amdocs Media. Jesus, how you doing today?
Pretty good, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. So first, I think it's going to be great for our audience just to learn a bit more about you and your role at Amdocs Media.
So I lead growth for our Amdocs Media division that is associated with all our marketing growth activities across the division and strategic partnerships.
Okay, great. So we'll be able to provide great perspectives today. I wanted to start really, data's become so important and such an important commodity for all those on the client side, right? Services, operators, digital media comes, everyone in the video, digital media space. So let's talk about, from your perspective, what the role of data is in the industry. That would be a great place to start.
Yeah, so before we talk about data, there are several consumer trends that are really impacting the way the industry is shaping, and that impacts the way data is needed and is going to be used moving forward. So if you look at over the last few years, over $20 billion has shifted from traditional pay TV to OTTs. And primarily the reason is, as you know, that the OTTs are providing a more relevant offering for those consumers. And that direct-to-consumer model is going to continue to trend, but that is going to create an additional challenge for the consumer, and it's already creating that. So if we look at the US, I think the last survey we saw was 3.8 streaming video on demand services per household in the US. That went up from about 2.8 a year ago. So the number of SVOD services is increasing. The consumer is experiencing the SVOD stacking phenomenon. And that is impacting the way they consume those services and the convenience. So the need for the data to really understand the consumer preference, the consumer needs, and how we help them to navigate through those experiences in a seamless way is going to be critical moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if we just to complement that a little bit, the other part of that is, when we look at the consumer, we cannot look at the consumer in one dimension, which is, in this case, we're talking about video, correct? But they also have other preferences, other subscription services, gaming, music, other entertainment. And during the pandemic, we saw that everybody is jumping into a subscription service. So the subscription services in the different verticals, they grew about 30% in the past 11 months. So as we look at data and the consumer, we really need to have a view on what are the other complementary services within that digital fragmented life that consumer has. They prefer and they are consuming. So the service provider can really aggregate a lot of those experiences and create a stickiness factor with that consumer, because they're going to be much more relevant in their day life.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. All across entertainment in different categories, you've seen huge spikes in consumption and how to use data better to inform that experience. Absolutely. So I wanted to kind of spin it forward, kind of looking into your crystal ball. How do you kind of see the role of data, and then maybe just trends that you expect to see kind of in our industry?
Well, I don't know if definitely data is going to play a key factor on the way everybody's served, correct? So everybody talks about AI and machine learning and how you interpret that into insights so you can improve customer acquisition with more relevant offerings, or do you include retention, whether it's active or passive churn on those subscribers based on the knowledge you have and the insights you have on that consumer journey with your service. But I will leave it on a vision that if I need to see a video service down the road, it's going to be a video like is based on virtual reality, that I can insert my own characters in the movies or the series that I'm watching, and creating that experience with my friends, that they are co-located with me or remotely, and I'm paying for that as a subscription, and probably I'm sharing that subscription with friends. And for that, all that experience that I just described needs to be extremely personalized to my needs, to my preferences, and it's going to be totally different than yours, Steve. So I think the potential and the need for the data harness and the way we use data to create those experiences is going to continue to be exponentially important.
Right, absolutely. And yeah, just to wrap up, as you kind of mentioned, the whole co-viewing experience, social distancing, COVID, it all kind of goes together. A lot of the big video and media companies, Group Watch and all these different co-viewing tools that they're adding, and that's just going to kind of continue, even if, knock on wood, hopefully we return to some type of normal in the near future. So
we hope so.
Yeah, let's hope so. Well, Jesus, that's all the time we have, but really appreciate your perspectives today. Thanks again.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks again for having me.